I was 27 years old when I started working the night shift at St. Vincent's Hospital. I wasn't a doctor or a nurse, I worked security. It wasn't a bad job. Most nights were quiet, just patrolling empty hallways and making sure no one wandered where they shouldn't. The real action was in the ER downstairs, but up on the upper floors, it was mostly silence, dim lights, and the hum of old ventilation systems. But the 6th floor, that was different. Everyone avoided the 6th floor. It was supposed to be just another part of the hospital, but years ago, it was shut down after budget cuts. Now it was just an abandoned wing, full of old hospital beds, broken equipment, and cabinets full of forgotten files. There was no reason to go up there. Except one night I had to. It was around 2:45 a.m. when my radio crackled. "Ethan, we got movement on the 6th floor. Motion sensor picked something up near room 616. Can you check it out?" I sighed. It was probably just a rat or a malfunctioning sensor. Still, I took the service elevator up. The moment the doors opened, the air felt wrong. It was cold. Not the usual stale hospital air. This was bone-deep, unnatural cold. The lights flickered weakly, casting long, trembling shadows down the hallway. As I stepped forward, my boots echoed off the tiled floor, making it feel like someone else was walking right behind me. I passed by old patient rooms, their doors slightly ajar, revealing dark, abandoned spaces filled with forgotten hospital beds. I gripped my flashlight, scanning the walls. Then, I reached room 616. The door was wide open. My stomach tightened. I was sure it had been closed before. I shined my light inside. The room was just as abandoned as the others, except for one thing. A hospital bed was pulled into the center of the room, and someone was lying in it. I froze. The figure was covered with a thin white sheet, motionless. My mind raced, trying to come up with an explanation. No patients were on this floor. The hospital had no reason to send anyone up here. Then the sheet moved. Not much, just the slightest shift, like someone was adjusting under the covers. My throat went dry. "Sir?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. No response. I took a step inside, and then, the hospital bed started rolling toward me. Not fast, not violently, just a slow, unnatural movement, as if someone was pushing it, but there was no one there. I stumbled back, my hands shaking as I reached for my radio. "I need backup on 6. Now." Then, the sheet slid off the bed, and there was nothing underneath. The bed was empty. My breath came in ragged gasps. I had just seen it move. There had been someone lying there. I knew what I saw. Then, from behind me, a whisper. "You're not supposed to be here." I turned so fast I nearly lost my balance. My flashlight shook as I aimed it toward the door. The hallway was empty. The radio crackled in my hand. "Ethan, what's your status?" I tried to respond, but my voice felt stuck in my throat. My heart pounded against my ribs. I just needed to get out. I rushed back into the hallway and slammed the elevator button again and again, my pulse hammering in my ears. Then, just as the doors slid open, I heard it. A soft, dragging sound, coming from the end of the hall. Something was coming toward me. I stepped into the elevator, not daring to look, and hit the button for the lobby. The doors started closing, and at the last second, I saw it. A figure in a hospital gown, standing just outside room 616. Not moving. Not chasing, just watching me. The doors shut, and I collapsed against the wall, my body trembling. When I got to the lobby, the other guard laughed when he saw me. "Man, you look like you saw a ghost." I didn't say anything. I just nodded, clocked out, and never stepped onto the 6th floor again. A few weeks later, curiosity got the best of me. I searched old hospital records, trying to find out why room 616 had a motion sensor in the first place. What I found still haunts me. In 1987, a patient went missing from room 616. A man in his 40s, admitted for heart surgery, simply vanished overnight. No one saw him leave. No security cameras caught him. His hospital bed, however, was found empty in the hallway the next morning. No explanation. No trace of the man. Just an empty bed. The same bed that had moved toward me that night. I don't know who, or what, was in that room with me. But sometimes when I walk past the hospital at night, I look up at the 6th floor, and every now and then, I swear I see someone standing there. I never wanted to be in that hospital again. I had spent my childhood there, not as a patient, but as the son of one. My mother had a rare neurological disease, and for most of my early years, St. Augustine's Hospital had been her home. I hated everything about that place. The smell of antiseptic, the cold fluorescent lights, the hushed voices of doctors speaking in terms I couldn't understand. She died when I was 12 years old, and I swore I'd never go back. But life has a cruel sense of irony. 20 years later, at 32, I found myself walking through those same halls again, this time as a nurse. The third floor was where I worked. It was a step-down unit, mostly patients recovering from surgeries, some in critical but stable conditions. It wasn't the worst place to be. At least, that's what I thought, until I met Mr. Howard. He was 72 years old, admitted for complications from pneumonia. Frail, weak, but still sharp. The first time I checked on him, he gave me a tired smile and said, "You look just like him." I blinked. Like who? His expression darkened. His voice dropped to a whisper. "The man in the ceiling." I forced a chuckle, assuming he was confused, but his hands trembled as he reached for my arm. "He watches us while we sleep. Don't let him take me." The word sent a chill up my spine, but I brushed it off. ICU delirium. Oxygen deprivation. Elderly patients sometimes said strange things. I reassured him that no one was going to take him, adjusted his four, and left the room. That was the first night. By the third night, I couldn't ignore it anymore. It was past 3 a.m., and the floor was eerily quiet. I was at the nurse's station, charting patient notes, when I heard it. A faint scratching sound. At first, I thought it was coming from the hallway, but as I stood up, I realized. It was coming from above me. From the ceiling. I hesitated, staring at the acoustic tiles overhead. The sound was light but deliberate, like fingernails dragging across the surface. I looked around. None of the other nurses seemed to notice. Then, Mr. Howard's monitor beeped. I rushed to his room, expecting to see his oxygen levels dropping. But when I entered, he was awake, staring at the ceiling with wide, terrified eyes. Before I could say anything, he grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "He's here," he whispered. My skin crawled. The room was freezing, colder than the hallway had been. I followed his gaze upward, and then for the first time I saw it. One of the ceiling tiles was slightly displaced. A gap, just big enough for someone to be watching through. I felt my pulse spike. I stepped closer, my breath shallow. The gap was too dark to see into, but my instincts screamed at me that something was there. And then, something moved. A pale, bony hand slowly emerged from the gap, pressing against the edge of the ceiling tile. I didn't think. I yanked Mr. Howard's emergency call button and stumbled back just as the tile shifted back into place, sealing whatever was up there inside the ceiling. A second later, the room's fluorescent lights flickered violently, and the old man gasped for breath. I tried to calm him, checking his vitals, but he kept staring at the ceiling. His final words before slipping into unconsciousness still haunt me. "He lives in the dark." Mr. Howard died 2 nights later. The cause? Cardiac arrest. It was unexpected. He had been recovering well. His daughter came to collect his belongings, and while she thanked us for his care, she also asked me something strange. "Did he mention the man in the ceiling?" I stared at her, shocked. "He did." She let out a shaky breath. "He used to talk about it when I was little. I thought it was just a story. I didn't know what to say. After she left, I made a decision. I needed to see what was in that damn ceiling. That night, after my shift, I waited until most of the staff had left for the night. Then, grabbing a ladder from storage, I returned to Mr. Howard's room. The hospital was silent. The kind of silence that makes you feel like you're being watched. I climbed the ladder slowly, my hands slick with sweat as I reached for the ceiling tile. I pushed it aside. The space above was black as ink. The smell hit me immediately. Rot. Decay. I pulled out my phone flashlight, aimed it inside, and nearly dropped it. There was a nest of old blankets, torn pieces of hospital gowns, rusty scalpels, and bones. Human bones. I felt bile rise in my throat. But the worst part, was the handwritten notes scattered around. "Don't sleep," he whispers in the vents. He takes the ones who see him. And then, a Polaroid photo, half buried under a yellowed hospital report. I picked it up with shaking hands. It was a grainy, black and white image of a hospital room. The same one I was standing in. But in the corner of the ceiling, a figure crouched, staring at the camera, its sunken eyes reflecting the flash. I scrambled down the ladder, so fast I nearly fell. I shoved the ceiling tile back into place and left that room, never looking back. The next morning, I reported what I found. By noon, maintenance sealed off the ceiling panels. By evening, they moved all patients out of the third floor indefinitely. No explanation, no official statement. But I know the truth. That thing has been living in the hospital for decades. Watching, waiting, and I was lucky to get out. Others weren't. I used to love working night shifts. There was something calm about the hospital after dark. The hallways, usually chaotic during the day, would become silent, the only sounds coming from heart monitors and the occasional echo of footsteps. Some people found it eerie, but to me it was peaceful. That was before I was assigned to room 733. It started on my third week at Blackwood General Hospital. The nurses avoided talking about that room, but I noticed the way they looked at me when they saw my assignment. Pity, concern, something unspoken. I thought it was just an old hospital superstition. Every hospital has one, right? The haunted room, the bad omen. I didn't believe in any of that. I should have. The first patient I cared for in room 733 was an elderly woman named Mrs. Holloway. She was recovering from surgery, frail but alert. She always greeted me with a polite smile. Until one night, at exactly midnight, I walked in for a routine check and found her awake, staring at the ceiling with wide, glassy eyes. "Are you all right?" I asked. She didn't respond. Her breath was shallow, her hands trembling as she slowly raised a finger and pointed toward the corner of the room. Then, in a whisper so soft I barely heard it, she said, "He's standing there." I felt my chest tighten. I turned, expecting to see someone in the room. Maybe a doctor, maybe another nurse. There was no one there. I forced a smile. "Mrs. Holloway, there's no one there. Try to get some rest." Her fingers curled into the sheets, gripping them tight. "The man with no face," she whispered. A chill ran through me, but I didn't want to feed her fear. I reassured her the best I could, adjusted her blanket, and left the room, shaking it off as delirium. But as I stepped out into the hallway, something hit me. A faint odor of flowers. Lilies. The kind they use at funerals. By the next night, something was seriously wrong. Mrs. Holloway's condition had been improving, but suddenly, her vitals started dropping. Doctors couldn't explain it. There was no medical reason. She refused to sleep. Every time I entered the room, she was awake, staring at that same corner. At 2:55 a.m., I heard her whispering. I leaned in close. "Don't let him take me." At 3:07 a.m., her heart flatlined. The doctors called it a sudden cardiac arrest. No warning, no logical explanation. As they covered her body with a sheet, I glanced toward the corner of the room, and for just a second I saw it. A shadow long stretched, too tall to be human, standing there. I blinked, and it was gone. The next morning, I went looking through old patient records. What I found made my stomach drop. In the last 10 years, every patient in room 733 had died at 3:07 a.m. No cause of death ever confirmed. And each one, every single one, had mentioned seeing the man with no face before they died. I tried to refuse the next patient in 733, but the head nurse just laughed. "You don't believe in those stories, do you?" I didn't answer. But at 2:30 a.m., my new patient, a middle-aged man recovering from surgery, began acting strangely. He kept glancing at the corner of the room, his fingers twitching against the sheets. At 2:55 a.m., he grabbed my hand. His skin was ice cold. "It's starting." I opened my mouth to ask what he meant. Then the overhead lights flickered. The air turned dense, thick, heavy, like something unseen was pressing down on me. 2:59 a.m. The lily scent returned, stronger this time, suffocating. 3 a.m. A dark figure appeared in the corner. I couldn't move. It wasn't just a shadow. It had form, but no face. No features. Just emptiness where a face should have been. The patient's body arched violently, his mouth open in a silent scream. I wanted to pull him away, but my body wouldn't listen. Then at 3:07 a.m., his monitor flatlined. And in that instant, the figure, it turned toward me. I felt something, a pull, like it was trying to drag me forward. I slammed my eyes shut, prayed, and then, the weight lifted. The room was normal again. The patient was gone, but I was still there. I quit a week later. I never went back to Blackwood General. But some nights, when I wake up at 3:07 a.m., my room unnaturally cold. I feel like someone is standing in the corner, not moving, not breathing, just waiting.